Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to wherever you are in the world. Welcome back to RCI TV, and today we're back with yet another one-make championship, and this time it's of course the turn of the Ferrari 488 Challenge Evo. Monza, christened the Temple of Speed, built in 1922. It was the world's third purpose-built motor circuit after Brooklands and Indianapolis. Steeped in history and playing host to numerous global championships, 5.79 kilometers in length with 11 turns. I'm John Dalton, your lead commentator. Alongside me, Jesse Lee, and as always, behind the cameras, Ash Bibby. Welcome, everyone.
Hello, John. Hello, everybody at home. Well, it's officially the meat of the season. What do I mean by that? Well, it's past the midway point, and we're cruising downhill through these final three races for the championship. There's several drivers, many drivers, still involved in podium positions and meaningful finishing spots here today. And just because you're at the top now doesn't mean that there's not time for it all to come crumbling down. And we are at one of the racetracks, the most revered potentially for such a downfall here today. And I say today, but realistically, I mean tonight. That's the other monkey wrench thrown into it, or a spanner thrown into the works, as the British would call it, because it is dark. It is a track that is notorious for their incidents in the chicanes. Hopefully we don't have any of that here tonight. But before we get involved with all that racing, we've got some qualifying here. 23 cars here tonight of the 28 possible, and they're taking on the task here in quali. Nobody's set an official time yet, but John, we got a good look at practice. A lot of people going for it, spinning, resetting, trying again. What is that all about? Are they trying to prove something about their car? Are they just trying to go for it to set a lap time, experimenting? Why do people end up binning it so much in practice?
Yeah, it's got to be a pushing the limits thing, kind of, the classic old min-max of the setups, and just tweaking stuff generally ready for the qualifying. Of course, we've been riding on board with Nico Kumpu for the majority of his lap there, as he just pushes a little bit wide in Parabolica. Heard numerous drivers all week complaining about the Ascari chicane, how unstable the car is and bouncy over the curbs, and we just witnessed that on Nico Kumpu's lap as he sets a benchmark time of a 1:48.797. Closest man so far, Christian Lindgren, very close indeed in that P2 spot. It's going to be a battle of the Nordic countries once again this evening, I think, with Nico Kumpu, Klaus Nyring and Christian Lindgren all looking very quick in their own right. We've got Nicholas Nordqvist now creeping into the initial times as well. And of course, with such small margins between the drivers, and we keep saying this all season long, it is the smallest of mistakes, Jesse, like you say, and it all just comes crashing down around you, especially if we start getting these trains forming here tonight at Monza. You're going to see some slipstreaming, some late dives, and some very late braking indeed. And I've already watched numerous cars kind of cut off the first chicane and straight down the escape road, just trying to push the absolute limit of what these cars can handle. Of course, they are that little bit more powerful than a GT3 car, a little bit more heavier as well, and they do have bigger brakes to boot, but unfortunately it just isn't enough to get the prancing horse slowed down. And I'm sure we're going to see plenty of drivers missing the chicanes this evening.
Yes, indeed. Well, you mentioned the Nordic countries. You weren't kidding. There is a Finn, a Dane, and a Swede at the top of this championship. They're all going at it. And we'll show you, of course, the championship points at the conclusion of qualifying here today. Azir Goat for Racing Team Sovalu, showing you exactly what John was illustrating, or Azir illustrating what John was telling you anyway. These cars are like a bucking bronco coming through Ascari, and that is a little bit of a problem, and it's almost about how well you can just handle the car, and almost in certain instances how lucky you can get based on how the car is pointed. Some of these lap times certainly going to be invalidated. That one was not invalidated by GOAT. They must have just been inside the track limits for that. It was a 49.002, I'm pretty sure. Klaus Nyring at the top of the scoring pylon. We saw Lindgren, who has been shuffled down to third because of Klaus's time. But interesting thing about Klaus and Christian, both of those cars were cars we saw going for it in Ascari, trying to figure that out in practice. They caused local yellows there a couple of times, but they are not certainly the exception. They're just one of the several cars that were going for it. They're going for it here in quali. 2/10 between the top two. Nyring and Kumpu, Lindgren, Minez, Rodriguez, and a half a second down to Dauber in 5th. Close so far.
Yeah, very close indeed, isn't it, Jesse? Near the top as Vossi Tigris jumps up into P17 with their lap with a 149.780. Of course, even if you look down the latter half of the grid, of course, you get to Callum Kerrigan, and then everybody again is within very small margins of each other. So only going to take a small mistake, or possibly too much curb, or maybe not enough curb, getting the car turned in enough to an apex, skate wide, and then you're going to see your rivals shooting up the inside of you. Denat Kalmari, another one of the TIG Gang racing cars. It's going to be pretty hard to spot these guys out in the darkness, although they each do have different auxiliary auxiliary lights on their cars, so hopefully should make it a little bit more interesting. There's some traffic to contend with. Somebody bailing out of their lap. That's the 777 of Joe Dauber. He's back to the pits he goes for another fresh set of Pirellis and just a top up of fuel. Meanwhile, Denat Kalmari keeping it tidy through Parabolica. Of course, track limits on the outside, very easy to overstep. To the line he goes, and a good improvement there up into P14 with a 149.477. Meanwhile, Menez Rodriguez comes across the line as well, currently in P4. He gains a position up into P3 with a 148.840, but still Klaus Nyring at the helm of the field so far. Tom Shipston takes the rallycross line through the gravel of Ascari, manages to pull the Ground Zero Racing number 60 back onto the Dark Star in front of Mike Redford there. It looks like he's potentially moving over, and he is. Lets Redford go past, and Tom Shipston back to the pits as well for a fresh set of Pirellis and some fuel.
Nyring with that 48.322 has done a lot of damage at the front of the field. They were already on pole position, but that has distanced themselves some distance from the field. It was the better part of 4/10. Nico Kumpu is now 0.36 behind. Was just reading chat earlier on, and Callum Kerrigan saying that they're not feeling it, and Kevin Boss firing back. They're friends off the track, by the way. Normally we don't allow heckling to go on, but that's a friendly relationship between the two of them. They're jabbing back and forth. Werschel and Van der Woede both with the uwu to you indeed. Mike Redford disconnected mid-qualifying lap. That's why he hasn't set a lap. In fact, he's just disappeared for a second time, has Mike Redford, now down to 22 cars. Some sort of connection issue going on there for Mike, and hopefully they're able to just stay in the race at this point.
Yeah, fingers crossed the old turning it off and back on again. The typical IT solution hopefully working for Mike Redford, and he can get back in and enjoy some racing with us. But yeah, like you say, Klaus Nyring, of course, at the top of the field with an absolutely electric lap. But cast your mind back just a week ago, Jesse, he set the pole time at the Nürburgring, and of course couldn't hold the pole by the time they got down to turn one. So qualifying not always as important as you think, especially at a track like Monza. Of course, you're set to gain a lot if you can certainly keep your car out of trouble in the first two choke points. Of course, the first two chicanes of the Retifiglio and the Della Roggia as you go through. Of course, the Curva Grande, providing everybody is clean through turn 3 as well. Keep it clean and find some clear air, and you may even slot your way through up a few more positions. And Vossi Tigris to the line. Not an improvement this time by. No, it was an improvement, sorry. Just wasn't a valid lap. So, of course, we'll put him no further up. Azure Goat, though, a little bit out of contention here tonight, Jesse. Of course, we've seen him more towards the front end of the field, but all the way down in P18. A little bit of traffic ahead in the form of Scotty, so potentially catching some draft off the wake of the Ferrari Challenge Evo car there. Down into Parabolica they go. Looks like Scotty is facing some front end troubles there, struggling to get the car turned into the apex. Both cars, of course, punching the throttle, accelerating out of the corner. Goat going to be using some of the toe Scotty has put off. Can they improve their time? They do, up into a very familiar territory, P6 with a 148.937. That's where we expect to see the 765, Jesse. As we watch here, Joe Dauber towards the end of his lap as well, the 777 Of course, he's looking to try and improve for rebound racing towards the front end of the grid a little bit more. And coming to the line is Joe Dorber in the 777. Can he match his teammates? And he does, all the way to the second row of the grid with a 1:48.767, just behind his teammate, of course, Nico Kumpu in the number 256. That's going to be an electric kind of duo towards the front end of the grid. Of course, maybe some team orders coming in to protect Nico's championship hopes. Of course, he's only about 9 points clear, I think, at the top of the helm from Klaus Nyring, just behind 180 to 171 points. So still very close for title honours. Meanwhile, we've got a little snake of cars coming on here. This is Callum Kerrigan, followed by, I believe, that's one of the Christians. That's Christian Clipper just behind in the black and green car as well. So Callum Kerrigan to the line now in the one party number 28 Ferrari, keeping it very close to the white line. Small improvement there up into P16, just ahead of Tom Shipston. Christian Clipper just behind there, coming in P14, and Carlos Calatayud in P7 as well. So a good improvement there for the Rebound Racing number 30. So a swarm of Rebound Racing cars at the helm of the field. Hopefully they can, of course, keep it very clean between them. No friendly fire this time by. And Nico Kumpu now bouncing his way through the Ascari chicane, setting himself up for a run down towards the Parabolica on his current lap time. It's looking very good indeed at the moment, but is it enough to topple Klaus Nyring? He's got to keep the Parabolica clean, pushing the track limits all the way up to the white line, manages to wrestle the prancing Ferrari all the way back to the right hand side to shorten the run to the line. Is it going to be enough for an improvement this time by? And it is, but not enough to jump towards the front of the grid. Still on the second row. Klaus Nyring, meanwhile, too much inside curb over the gravel, and the prancing horse becomes a bouncing donkey, and into the wall they go. Localized yellow flags there. Tom Shipston, meanwhile, towards the kind of middle end of the grid, normally where we see Tom just kind of floating outside the top 10, but again, a bit of a dark horse, pardon the pun. We normally see him navigating the ground zero cars all the way towards the top end of the grid come the race time. So not always good qualifying pace in Tom, but certainly good race pace behind the man. And John O'Racer back with us once again in the 699. He's now coming towards the line for his end of the qualifying lap. Just over a minute to go, so still room for improvement if John does decide to take another lap, and towards the line he goes. A 1:49.027 will be just enough to tickle the inside of the top 10, just behind Les Stevenson and just ahead of Richard Whittle. Meanwhile, Mendes Rodriguez jumps another place from P5 to P4, beating Joe Dorber and splitting the two Rebound Racing cars. And what a fantastic qualifying session we've had here so far, Jesse, and just under a minute to go. There's still plenty of room for improvement for some of these drivers.
Mike Redford's telling us that he may be starting from the pit lane. That wouldn't be the biggest worry. Mine would be staying connected, but he is back in for the time being. I reckon he will probably either start from the pit or start from dead last. Now, who has anything for Klaus Nyring? Nobody thus far. Lindgren has got the closest 83/100ths of a second. Several cars are on a lap. A couple are bailing. One in the Lesmos has just gone off. The number 15 of Tigris, that will be the end of their qualifying run. Remember, if you get to the line here, the 777 won't. Thought for a second Dauber might get a free lap here, but they will not. They're coming down to the pit lane. Everybody on the racetrack currently is on a valid lap. You can tell if they invalidate because their globe, just like the 699 of a Razor has done, it turns light blue instead of gray. Of course, the red dot is the car we're focusing on. That's the Sim Brothers car of Christian Lindgren. The 699's invalidated in Ascari. The 28 has a validated in Ascari. That's Callum Kerrigan, and they're all stacking up there. It's clearly the choke point in these Ferrari Challenge cars. Lindgren's done the same thing. There's been an accident. A car stalled there, the 48, and that has caused a collision with Lindgren, or Lindgren caused a collision with another car, so to speak. All of those cars sitting there because they have invalidated. The 153 of Keith Whittle has invalidated. Carlos Calatayud for Rebound Racing is on a valid lap, though. He needs the better part of 7/10, and he won't get any of it back. He'll stay in 7th place. Just 2 cars left on valid lap, one of which is Ground Zero's Tom Shipston. the number 60 in 13th could do with a pickup. A 10th or so gets him a spot, but he won't quite do it. That was an improvement on time, but was only a 1/100th of a second improvement. The last car out on a victory lap is Nico Kumpu. One of the rebound cars already has pole. Is he going to finish the lap? No, he is not. He's not going to show his cards at the end of qualifying.
Yeah, just want to touch on Nico there. Last time by, before the clock did hit 0, it was enough to topple Klaus Noring, but only just about, so still very competitive between the Finn and the Dane. And there you see it on your screens, of course, the final qualifying times. And again, Jesse, I think every single round has been like this. Not one driver getting 3 purple sectors to their name.
No, it's so rare when that happens. In fact, we only had 2 races in the span of 365 days here on RCI TV where we even saw that happen. We saw that actually happen somewhat recently, but it is an incredibly rare thing, and many different cars taking fastest sectors. And that's even more impressive considering these are all spec cars. These Ferrari Challenge cars are identical, and despite that, these drivers have strengths and weaknesses around this race circuit. It is incredible that they're able to differentiate themselves. That should end up having some good implications for racing here tonight. But before we drop the green flag of the race, John, we've talked about the Nordic invasion on the championship points. Let's show them what the championship points look like.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, we've got some very competitive Nordic drivers here. And of course, Nico Kumpu at the helm of the championship with 180 points. Although, don't discount Klaus Naring, of course, from Denmark, 171 points just behind. A little bit further back, but still within arm's reach, I would say, Christian Lindgren, again, from another Nordic country there. So 3 different Nordic countries at the top of the championship. We then got Raphael Huel from Germany, of course, on 118 points, before we see yet another Scandinavian man, and it's Nicholas Nordqvist on 106. 3 points behind Tom Shipston on 103, and 3 points behind him, John Aracer on a dead 100. We then got Angela Scotti and Joe Dorber, both tied for 8th with 90 points, and Andy Boardman on 88 will round out your top 10. On the next page, of course, Azure Goat with 77 points. Just behind him, it's our very own Les Stevenson on 70. Bossy Tigris on 67, with Carlos Calatayud on 61. Miguel Martins just behind on 50, and Theobald Roskam on 43. Denat Kalmari just 1 point behind on 42, and our very own RCI Kevin Boss, of course, missing from tonight's event on 40. And we then got Mike Redford on 36, followed very closely by Christian Clippert on 33, rounding out, of course, your top 20. We then got Richard Whittle tied with Neil Pimlott on 30 points. We've got Marco Fucuscio on 24, Mitchell Menez Rodriguez down the back end of the field on 23, followed by Hubert Hauser on 17, with Martin Foster on 11, Callum Kerrigan on 10, and Keith Whittle on 8, and everybody else with a dash next to their name has unfortunately signed out and will take no further part in the championship. Of course, we started off with 39 sign-ups, I believe, at the beginning of the season, and of course the attrition rate is normally about where it is now, I would say, Jesse. Still a lot of people competing up and down the grid for, of course, honours. We've got Nico Kumpu fighting Klaus Naring, these 2 cars on the front of the grid. That's for overall championship honours. And of course, not like usual in RCI, where we have, of course, the split pro and am groups. It is everybody lumped into one for this championship. So every position matters at this point.
Every position matters, and every race matters, because there is no drop round in this championship. So every point, so very vital. It's super fitting that Kumpu and Naring and Lindgren are all at the top of this field. They're the 3 fighting for the championship. Realistically, Lindgren has the tallest mountain to climb. Kumpu and Naring are basically 2 positions away from each other at the halfway point in the championship, and certainly they'll be wishing for a clean start to this race to get away and just do their own thing. Lindgren will look to be making some moves here early in the race, and Joe Dauber mentioned in our chat, ready for some flying Fiats. He's making light of the Ferraris into T1, no doubt. But what we're hoping is that everybody remembers that the brakes on these cars a little bit more spongy, they're a little less responsive than in GT3 or even GT2 machinery, if we're completely honest with you. We're just hoping that in the waning or lack of light here of Monza, that doesn't become an issue. Still 23 cars strong after the halfway point. That's a lot of race cars. That is a lot of margin for error. You can get 4 and 5 wide down the pit straight here, but it narrows up, and it continues to narrow up almost in a funnel before you get to the Prima Variante or the first chicane in this race. John Dalton, I will ask, what is your prediction here? We've got the 2 heavy hitters, the 3 heavy hitters, if you will, up in front of this field. What is lap 1, turn 1 going to look like for our front row?
I'd like to say it's going to be a relatively clean front row, but of course we know any kind of edge you get off the line in Monza, it's a very long drag down to turn 1, so anything you can kind of capitalize on, you know, you're going to try and take it on. You're going to try and seize every opportunity you can get. So expect, I would say, 2 wide, maybe 3 wide at a push, but I'd like to say everybody is going to get through cleanly, although I know Kirsten, the commentator, now that's probably not going to happen. But we see lots of brake dragging, of course, from the front runners. It's going to be a race to see who can get their Pirellis up to temperature the fastest and who can build pressure as well as we get towards the green flag. Of course, no tyre warmers in the GT2 category. Everybody starts off with stone cold Pirelli, so it's going to be a crucial thing tonight. Of course, 16 degrees in the air, 16 degrees down on the track, so expect lots of narrow brake ducts, and hopefully people don't go too narrow on those, Jesse, because those long brakes, they're probably going to get even longer if you've made that mistake with your setup.
Yeah, what I am curious about is the GT2 category showed up on the timing and scoring. This is the Ferrari Challenge category, so I'm not quite sure what's going on with that. Of course, the GT2 category officially launched last week, and what a day it was. Everybody has an opinion on the cars. It's going to make endurance racing, it's going to make multi-class racing a very, very interesting prospect in 2024. I can tell you that. But for right now, Ferrari Challenge cars in a very dark Monza. Mike Redford, by the way, has made the start of the race. His connection seems to have stabilized. He's not starting from the pit lane. The 95 Ferrari for Mike Racing is starting dead last. That is somewhat, can be, one of the safest positions on the track. So we will see about that. We have seen cars who have started from pit lane win races here, though that has been some years since we've seen a heroic drive like that. Mikael Sundström, a proud Swede himself, says go Sweden to the many Swedish drivers in the field. Mikael Sundström, moderator for the channel, but much more than that. A lot of people don't know Mikael outside of a racing helmet. He's an incredibly quick racing driver, but beyond that, he does a lot of stuff on our back end that keeps us going. So cheers to you, Mikael. Glad that you're with us here on a Monday. Well, coming through the Parabolica for the final time under pace speed. Let's hope for a very, very calm and precise turn number 1. Will the cars allow that? We will have to see. A pit stop to give when the pit stop cycle opens, but that's all in the future. Right now, it's visor down, focus about turn number 1, and even before that, getting a good launch here.
Yeah, again, a good launch is very crucial indeed. We saw, of course, last time at the Nürburgring, you know, how crucial that was when, of course, I think Nico Kumpu launched himself from the 2nd or the 3rd row of the grid and managed to catch a few of the front runners completely unaware of what this car can do when it, of course, gets a good launch. Of course, Nico Kumpu is going to have the inside line into the first chicane, although that soon becomes the outside when the switchback comes to the left. So Nico's going to have to clear Klaus Naring and defend him should he want to keep his position by the time they get to the Curva Grande.
I'm nervous, man.
I'm very nervous indeed. I mean, there's less numbers, of course, than usual here at Monza, but we know the pinch point, Jesse, of the Del Rettifilo chicane. It can be an absolute nightmare sometimes, but of course, coming to the gantry now, cars 2x2. Hopefully you've got enough temperature and pressure in those tyres, and the green flag drops, and it looks like a fairly symmetrical start from your two front runners. Maybe Klaus Naring with a slightly better launch in the background. Christian Lindgren covering off the middle. Menez Rodriguez to the outside, and Andy Boardman just lurking in the third row, seeing what he can do. And the two front runners, they both outbreak themselves. Azure Goat takes the shortcut. John Racer, I think, as well. And Klaus Naring, of course, easing off and doing the honourable thing almost, but lets Christian Lindgren past into the Grande Curva. And of course, Menez Rodriguez nearly followed suit, and Andy Boardman chomping at the heels just in the background. Now, the next pinch point, of course, the Della Roggia. Again, don't brake too early, don't brake too late. And there's Archie Bargy in the background, 3 wide. Klaus Naring has to take to the escape road once again. It looks like friendly fire possibly from another Nordic country in the form of Menez Rodriguez alongside, and quite possibly Christian Lindgren involved there. It looked like a lot of drivers were a bit too cautious, Jesse, after overshooting the first chicane, and we've got a yellow flag out in Lesmo 1. A couple of cars involved there, the number 137 to name one. And not sure who else is underlying on there, but race replay. Let's have a look what happened. This is into the Lesmos. This is Les Stevenson getting rear-ended.
Stevenson and Nicholas Nordquist.
Yeah, it is Nicholas Nordquist and Les Stevenson into the Lesmo, already taking chunks out of each other. So heavy rear-end damage to Les's car and front-end damage to Nicholas's car. Hopefully they can survive to the pit window before they come down to fix the damage. But it looks all relatively calm, and somebody spun in the background out of the Ascari chicane for the first time. That's the number 157. That's Keith Whittle, I believe. Was he helped, or did he do it naturally? Mike Redford there getting into the side of him in the middle. Keith Whittle trying to come back across the apex. Looks like Martin Foster went for the gap. Azure Goat just couldn't make it, and Goat clattering into the rear of Keith Whittle as well. So a relatively calm start from the chicane point of view, Jesse, but it's all kicked off around other parts of the circuit where it doesn't normally.
Yeah, here's a secondary look of that. Slower was Whittle there. Goat comes up, and you just don't have the aero to turn these cars whenever danger happens like that. And even if you let off the throttle, it can still lead to contact. You just, they don't steer quite like a cruise ship, but sometimes it doesn't feel like it's far off when you've got to make snap decisions. Oh, and it's a completely sideways race car, and he's going to come all the way back across the track somehow. The 957 of Richard Whittle, but somehow everybody was able to avoid them. Nobody panicked, and somehow Richard Whittle, the only car involved there, was their contact prior to that set that up, or was that just a sideways race car? Let's see. That definitely looked like rear-ending contact in a corner that destabilized it, and somehow everybody was able to get around the Richard Whittle's Wizards 957. That was incredibly lucky there. Dinet Kalmari, oh my goodness. Oh yes, a subsequent accident as spatial awareness is proving premium. 2-3 cars, we're going bowling. Nico, my cousin, Dinet Kalmari in another accident, this time in the Ascari chicane.
Yeah, Kalmari really in the wars along with the Whittles. It just looked like you say, it was an event after the accident had already happened, and I think that's Mike Redford just peering through the trees there. Callum Kerrigan once again having to take more avoiding action to avoid cars, but how nobody collected Richard Whittle in the Curva Grande is way beyond me. That's a very scary place, even at the best of times in a GT3 car when you get turned, let alone in one of these rocket ships. It's so fast in a straight line. Meanwhile, John Racer trying to climb back through the field after missing turn 1. He's just behind Tigris at the moment. Of course, Christian Clipper ahead of these guys, nursing some damage more than likely. And of course, Scotty just ahead as well, probably with some front-end damage after running into the rear of Richard Whittle. Of course, no live stewards here tonight, Jesse. It's all going to have to be settled after the race. So, of course, race results at the end, posting, pending any stewards' inquiries. And not sure how you take some of those. They are, you know, it's a narrow circuit, Monza, at the best of times, and it's even more dangerous when you put everybody in a car that is so much faster than what they're used to, of course, in the GT3 machinery. Like you said earlier, Jesse, of course, you haven't got the aero to suddenly change direction in these cars, and even lifting off and braking mid-corner can really upset the balance and almost throw yourself into the wall, you know, just to try and avoid somebody. So it's a super tricky one to call, isn't it? Whether you try and avoid somebody and, you know, risk your own car, or do you just pray to the gods that you're going to miss it? And I think Callum Kerrigan and Danak Kalmari certainly did when Richard Whittle went round.
Yeah, I was going to say, it's well spotted. That's exactly what happened there. You kind of have to make a move, and it looks like you're just spearing off into the gravel, and that you really are, but that's kind of what you have. There's no fine movement in snap decisions like that, and that's why I was so impressed that nobody hit Richard Whittle whenever they were spun off and came back across the racetrack. Richard, of course, was completely defenseless there, and everybody else was just, the timing was right, because there is no way you were going to A, slow this car down, or B, change direction quick enough to miss that car, especially in the Curva Grande. That just wasn't going to happen. Now, let's reset the race for you. Nico Kumpu survives the turn 1 melee where him and Klaus Nyring both missed that corner. Nico Kumpu, up until this lap we're on right now, had the fastest lap of the race. That has been taken away by Christian Lindgren, who is down in 5th place. Lindgren and Menez Rodriguez, by the way, we got so caught up in Kumpu and Nyring going off. Both Menez Rodriguez and Lindgren made turn 1, but they came together exiting the first chicane, and that stacked up the field behind them incredibly badly. They were 3 wide back there, and that's what caused some of the early chaos, though that's not inevitably what caused the incident in Lesmo and beyond, of course. But even still, that was a scary moment. Both those cars were able to survive. Lindgren and Menez were both in front of Klaus at some point, and now that has reset Klaus Nyring back up to P2, something I suspect has happened to Christian Lindgren, because they're down to 5th. Andy Boardman promoted up to 4th place in the 69. Joe Dauber hanging in there in 6th place. Keith Whittle came down pit lane to, no doubt, fix the damage on the 157, but they have been caught for speeding, minor speeding on pit lane. That has given them a drive-through penalty. And of course, all of this outside of the pit window, so this will not count as their pit stop. Ultimately, Keith Whittle will have to make 3 trips down pit road tonight.
Yeah, it's gone from bad to worse, hasn't it, for the Whittles. Meanwhile, Richard Whittle making up a place here on Hubert Hauser. A little bit of argy-bargy through the Parabolica, and that, of course, sets up Redford as well to gain a position just behind with a much faster run out of the Parabolica, able to do the old up and under on Hauser. Meanwhile, Whittle trundling down pit lane to, that's Keith Whittle, to serve his drive-through penalty. Meanwhile, Redford sizing up a move down into turn 1. So much speed being carried in by Redford, but manages to stand on the anchors, draw it up in time, uses a little bit of the sausage on the inside. Could that hamper his run towards the second chicane? I think he's done just enough to fend off Whittle, but a well-timed move there from Mike Redford, and I believe you can check him out on Twitch as well. I think the MYK Red 95 is his Twitch handle, so I'm not sure if he's streaming tonight. Probably not with the moves, but it looks
really
like
missed it.
Richard Whittle has overcooked the second chicane so much. He's over the inside curbs of both halves and does the right thing, I think, and lets Redford back through there. But it was almost what happened, wasn't it, on the first run into the second chicane, Jesse? A lot of drivers were checking up too early, which then caused the drivers behind to almost panic brake to try and avoid them, and carnage just kind of ensued. I mean, that's how Christian Lindgren found his way out of the top 3 that he was so confidently in after the first chicane. Of course, it's a little bit tricky, that second pass, and let's have a race replay here. Carlos Calatayud, I believe, on Joe Dauber. This is rebound on rebound, if my eyes aren't deceiving me, towards the front of the grid. A little bit of hip and check there. I think Menez Rodriguez there going down the escape road through the polystyrene bollards, but Joe Dauber has found their way past their teammate now, Carlos Calatayud, and I think it's going to be crucial that these guys work together, Jesse, or they're going to start squabbling, and they're just going to hamper themselves. And Tom Shipston is lurking just behind as well for ground zero. He's going to want to try and capitalize on anything that goes on between the rebound cars.
I'll tell you what, that was contact, sure, but that's not even contact that gets brought up in the meeting. You know what I mean? You don't mention it. It's racing. The cars are difficult. If it's a GT3 car and you're laying on each other a little bit, maybe you have a conversation about it. Ferrari Challenge car, I think you kind of let that go a little bit. Like, yeah, the space wasn't 100%. There wasn't an air gap there, but, I mean, hey, it is that kind of racing after all. But especially between teammates, there's no malicious intent in that at all, and they just continue on. But yeah, you were 100% spot on. They've got to start to work together here. Maybe Carlos Caladia is going to play tail gunner to keep Tom Shipston off of Joe Dauber here and preserve a top 5. Who knows? You never know. The 4 cars in front of them, any one of these drivers can have an incident, and all of a sudden, if you're Carlos Caladia, you hold up Shipston, that's not only good for your teammate, it could be good for you. You could get back in the top 5 just by playing it somewhat safe. Christian Lindgren, the quickest car on the racetrack, up in P4, as it is quite cool here this evening. No clouds in the sky, no weather, thank goodness. 16 degrees matched track and ambient temperature here tonight, as these cars going side by side as your goat, trying to pick up the pieces, trying to make moves. So are Dinek Kalmari on Hauser in front as well. And they just about get all of that sorted. The 34 has gone off in front of all of these cars. That's Scotty. Oh, and Scotty is in a horrible area of the racetrack. Several cars see them late, and it causes them to ricochet. They try to avoid action or avoid the stricken car. That was a knee-jerk move. And what happened is they ended up running into each other. They all scatter, and that was another scary moment with a stranded race car.
Yeah, somehow all surviving there, just having a hard lick down the Armco. Either side of Zurgoat getting in to Hauser, which in turn, of course, put them into, I'm not sure who else was involved. Was it Scotty? It was one of the Whittle cars. Richard Whittle, once again, the 957, really in the wars tonight. And I think it's going to be a big raid on the Maranello parts bin come the end of the 48 minutes, because there's going to be a lot of damaged parts on these cars, Jesse.
Yeah, there certainly is, and we've seen that. These races have been physical. I don't think we expected it to be anything but physical, but it's one of those where it was kind of understood quite early on that you're going to get side by side, you're going to get stuck, and you're not going to have the aero to bail you out here. And it's fast. It's a car that doesn't stop, particularly as great as some of the other machinery that these drivers will be used to racing in ACC. So all those things together, it leads to contact, it leads to overrunning corners, making mistakes. And I mean, by all accounts, by the way, Scotty didn't do anything wrong. Scotty was very predictable. They had an incident. They knew there were cars coming. They were in an unenviable position, but they sat there. They allowed all the cars to come through, but the problem was the group behind them, Goat, Kalmari, Whittle, and all those, they were 3 wide, John. And you see the yellow flag, but when you're that close to somebody else, it's hard to see those other cars. You see that car, and you're trying to get out of the way, but where do you go? You're 3 wide. You're taking up the entire straight, and further incidents ensue. Klaus Nyring, by the way, for Nyring Racing, has caught back up to Nico Kumpu for the overall lead of the race. Now, that would be quite interesting if Klaus was able to beat Nico in this race, simply because we would go down to the final 2 rounds of the championship being very, very close in points. They're less than 10 away from each other now. In fact, they're 9. If Nyring would go on to win this race and Lindgren would keep the quickest lap, Klaus would be second in the championship with 2 to go by about 4 points.
Yeah, it's going to make it very interesting indeed, isn't it? Of course, the points awarded for the fastest lap, so anybody else that can take that away, of course, is going to help Klaus Nyring that little bit more on his championship crusade. and of course pole position nets 4 points as well. So Nico Kumpu, of course, getting the bonus for this round. So yeah, it's going to make it super close, of course, going into the last 2 rounds. Of course, next week we head to Donington Park, typically a very old school circuit, much like Monza, although a little bit slower. So it's going to be an interesting one for sure. And then the final round, really painful round, should we say, that's been inflicted on these drivers. Very own Tim Ireland has chosen Bathurst for the final. So these cars over the mountain, I can only assume it's going to be very sketchy indeed. Like we keep saying, lack of aero, extra weight, bigger brakes. It's a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
They saw the schedule, the drivers saw the schedule, and I can tell you, I've talked to a great many of them. There was a collective groan when they saw Bathurst on the schedule. And even I saw it and went, is that particularly wise? I think they're up to the challenge. I think it'll be fine. But it is going to be the ultimate test in these cars. And oh my goodness, a fender bender here. Marco Fasciuto has been rear-ended, I believe, by Callum Kerrigan, unless that was a different car. It is dark. You will have to excuse us, but we're going to get a replay here. This is Callum Kerrigan, and that is Marco Fasciuto. And Kerrigan gets a bump for good measure. That just goes back to the brakes.
Yeah, Stevenson there being a bit of a collateral damage, should we say, in that incident. But yeah, of course, like you say, Jesse, it comes down to the brakes. And once again, Christian Clipper into the back of Tom Shipston, turning him in the second chicane. Of course, the Della Roggia just before the Lesmo 1 corner. Christian Clipper done the honourable thing, given the position back to Shipston, but of course lots of time lost there. Meanwhile, Nicholas Nordquist and Stevenson side by side through the Della Roggia, just about making it. Callum Kerrigan in the background, overcooking once again, and over the curb he goes. So I can only assume there's going to be a lot of track limit warnings already collecting up between the drives. Of course, we're about 17 minutes into this race, Jesse, and everybody's racing like it's the last 17 minutes to go. We've still got a 28-minute pit window open. Of course, drivers must come down the lane at some point during this 30-minute window. So drivers must take on a litre of fuel minimum and also change the tyres. So a lot of drivers electing to go for the kind of half and half, so half a tank of fuel, come in, new set of Pirellis, other half of the fuel, go back out for another half an hour. So almost dividing the 1 hour into 2 30-minute sprint races. We've already got a few early stoppers, Menez Rodriguez being one of them. Richard Whittle has managed to clear their stop. Of course, we've got Les Stevenson down the lane, Scotty as well, this time by with Hauser, and it looks like Foster is sizing up a move on Redford down into turn 1. Of course, Redford on the left of your screen, Foster on the right, and down the escape road Foster goes. Redford just about manages to make the corner in the MYK Racing number 95. I think Foster's going to do the honourable thing and concede the position there, knowing that he had no chance of getting that Ferrari drawn up. But it comes back, doesn't it, Jesse, to the brakes. Of course, a lot of drivers have been practicing solo. They've qualified solo. They haven't had the slipstream of the car ahead. And suddenly you're chucking an extra 5 to 10 kilometres an hour on top of what you're already doing. And suddenly that GT3 braking point definitely isn't going to work anymore, and you're going to have to shave another kind of 10 meters off the brake zone to get the car drawn up in time. So it is purely the slipstream effect right now affecting a lot of these drivers.
Yeah, it's true. You practice and you qualify and you worry about single car speed and you get your braking marker, whatever that may be on the track side, and you worry about that. But what you don't think of, and this happens a lot in endurance racing in general, especially at Le Mans, Daytona, topical. We just had the 24-hour Daytona over the weekend. It happens there too, where you'll go down in the Le Mans chicane or whatever chicanes you have at actual Le Mans. I know that is confusing. The Le Mans chicane is actually at Daytona, but I digress. It's one of those, and your braking points aren't where you've left them, and you get surprised. And especially you're out there, you're trying to battle, you're trying to race other drivers respectfully but hard at the same time, and you just get it wrong and you feel horrible for it. We've saw a couple of cars go completely off and make mistakes earlier on, and that they don't mean to do it. You can tell immediately. They pull off, they let the other car go back through. You never want to have that happen. that's the other part of it right there. You never want to have something like that happen. Andy Boardman, I believe, just going a little bit too deep, and he's trying to keep his head from going under, but he can't, and he's lost out to Christian Lindgren. The Sim Brothers 48 has taken P3, didn't even really have to make the pass, just had to give Boardman enough room to survive out there on the curb. Lindgren squared up the corner. He's up into P3.
Yeah, it's like we were talking about earlier, wasn't it, Jesse? The smallest of mistakes can really give away crucial time and even worse positions in the case of Andy Boardman. So Christian Lindgren will now be released into free air. 6.2 seconds to the good of the next couple of cars ahead in the form of Klaus Neuring and Nico Kumpu. I mean, Nico Kumpu even pulling out nearly 2 seconds to Klaus Neuring, so he's really got his skates on at the moment. Meanwhile, Denak Kalmari trying to find his way back through the field. Of course, Foster is the next car in line for him, so he's going to get the slipstream up to the Ascari chicane. Hopefully stands on the brakes in time, because suddenly that braking marker isn't quite working as it did, and all very clean through the Ascari chicane between these two, and this fight will live on for another few laps. So still plenty of action going on. Of course, Carlos Calatayud is in the pits, so he's elected to bring that car down. Looks like Scotty Jesse potentially retired, been sat in the pit lane for a few laps now. So go on.
Yeah, John, they went off in a Ascari and they teleported to pit lane about a lap and a half ago. You are correct.
So Scotty,
but they're back out though.
No,
they're not out. They're out of the server is what happened there. The P, which indicates they're in pit lane, disappeared. But I guess it maybe does that when they leave. But you were very astute. That Scotty has been our first retirement of the race. They went off in a Ascari, and I reckon they have decided it's not worth the frustration, the car being banged up, and they have retired. Carlos Calatayud's on pit road right now, but that's not retirement. That is a scheduled stop for the number 30.
Yeah, number 30, of course, coming down the lane. Probably going to fix any damages while they have the chance as well and get back out there to see what they can do. Meanwhile, of course, Christian Clipper onto the back of Tigris. No, this isn't Kalmari. You're not seeing double. Of course, a couple of similar liveried cars in the field tonight. So these guys are going to be getting close up to the Ascari chicane. Could there be a move on for Christian Clipper? He's getting very close indeed, under the old banking, through the tunnel, of course, and it's the last of the late breakers. Clipper braking first, and of course that's going to allow Tigris to take the line through the corner. Clipper very sensibly, maybe Jesse, slots in behind. Of course, you don't have the aero, like we keep saying, to kind of, you know, suck the car through Ascari like you normally would with a typical GT3 car. Sometimes it's possible to go side by side through the long swooping right, but just not possible in these cars. Of course, once you get offline and all of the grip kind of disappears, maybe even out onto the marbles, you just don't have the aero to point the car back in to where you need it. So maybe very sensibly there from Clipper, slotting it in behind, and he's now going to use the slipstream of the car ahead, the number 15, of course, down into turn 1. We've seen a lot of drivers get it wrong here. Clipper's going to be carrying extra speed alongside Tigris. Again, last of the late breakers. Who will be? Looks like Tigris has just about got the car stopped for the apex, along with Christian Clipper behind, and these guys will keep going for another lap. Of course, still 22 minutes of the pit lane open, so again, that could be settled on pit lane if they have a very different pit stop time between them. But Kalmari still not being able to find a way past Foster in the RPMS car just ahead. Of course, Kalmari looking very cautious into turn 1. Foster definitely getting it drawn up this time. No need to go down the escape road, and this gap looks like it's widening ever so slightly.
Sure does, and I might have been a little bit premature. This is a retirement for Carlos Calatayud, who sat in the pit lane for 3 laps just now, and they have retired that car. The number 30 will take no further part in today's race. I thought that was a routine stop, but is not. The number 30 has retired. Down to 21 of those cars, only 4 of them have done their mandatory stop. They've got 21 and a half minutes left to get it done. We'll see, no takers from the back of the field here. I don't think any of the leaders will be coming down here either. I think they're going to try, and the majority anyway, will try to split this 30 minutes apiece, 30 aside. And for right now, it is race on, especially if you're Denak Kalmari or Azir Goat, who has caught the back of Mike Redford. Redford started 23rd, I'll remind you. They're up to 12th currently. and now have just been momentarily released from the grips of Racing Team Solvalu's Azure Goat. Kumpu continues to lead. That gap is growing exponentially. They were nose to tail a few laps ago, John, and last lap through they were 1.1 seconds. This time through it was 2.1 seconds. So either Nico Kumpu has turned on the afterburners or Klaus Neiring has made a couple of mistakes.
Yeah, maybe Nico Kumpu dropped the sandbags out the Ferrari possibly and said, you know what, this is what we can actually do in the 256 rebound car. And of course, pulling out the gap ever so slightly. Like you say, Jesse, of course, it was very close indeed just a few laps ago. But whether it's Neiring's mistake or Kumpu's got his foot down and just pulling that gap away. But Christian Lindgren doesn't have an answer for either of them at the moment. He's managed to pull away from Andy Boardman 1.7 seconds to the good, but Christian Lindgren still 6.5 seconds behind your leading two as well. As Mike Redford elects to take to the escape road, Azure Goat over the inside curb, and Redford comes back on there just behind Azure Goat. So both drivers there messing up the chicane somewhat, but of course Redford just making the bigger mistake of the two. Of course, race replay here goes down the official escape road, draws up nicely. Over the speed hump he goes, and of course Azure Goat will find his way through on the circuit after missing the second half of the chicane. So again, it's a last of the late breaker scenario, isn't it? Who can brake later? And unfortunately, sometimes neither of you can brake as late as you think you can. And I think it's just a learning curve here, isn't it, Jesse? You know, it shows maybe the drivers that have practiced that a little bit more over others, and you know, you just know how late you can brake in this car before it simply just won't pull up anymore. Of course, with track and air temperatures being on 15 degrees C, of course brake ducts are going to be ever so slightly smaller than they normally are to of course keep the heat in the brakes, which then radiates out to the tires to stop getting long cooling down periods between the chicanes and of course down the main straight. And that's something that always affects cars at Monza. So maybe a few drivers gone a little bit too narrow on the brake ducts, Jesse, maybe suffering some overheating on the brakes and some brake fading going into the chicanes. And suddenly, once again, your braking point also changes, because not only now have you got slipstream, you now also got extreme heat in those brakes, and the cars just aren't stopping the way they were before, as Joe Dorber, of course, decides to give us a prime example there through the Della Roggia chicane.
Huge thanks to Ash Bibby. Ash, thanks for the gifted membership to the RCI TV channel. That goes to Zhao Manso, who has doubled up week after week. He just keeps winning. You might want to start calling Ash Santa Claus if I'm Zhao. For those of you that don't know, Manso entered to win the GT2 pack. All you had to do was drop a $5 donation or a sub in the past 2 weeks. Of course, that prize was given out last week. Zhao actually won that, and he's won a gifted membership today, also courtesy of Ash Bibby. Ash, you didn't give me any instructions for that, but thanks. Oh, I see. Okay, so what's happened here was Ash asked for an uwu for a gifted sub. Manso uwu'd with a question mark, and Ash delivered. Thank you so much for that, Mr. Bibby. Doing double duty, keeping the chat interacted with, and also keeping us abreast of what's going on in the race. Talented man, that Ash Bibby, and thank you so much for everything you do for us here. Coming up to about 32 minutes in the race. And John, I didn't catch it, but Ash said somebody sacked. Who's fired?
I think him on Wednesday, you mentioned in the pre-briefing, possibly. I think that's what he's alluding to there on that one. Got a few messages in the official Ferrari Challenge chat as well. News from Carlos Calatayud. A very public apology to Andy Boardman and Christian Lindgren. No words. I'm on new load cell pedals and can't understand what happened. So Carlos possibly with a few braking troubles in the rebound racing Ferrari. And Angela Scotti as well. Head isn't in a good place of racing tonight, so felt best to just park it. And of course, that's the crucial thing, isn't it, Jesse? You know, number one is you. Forget about us here at RCI. If you don't want to race, you don't want to race. Focus on you.
You gotta know when to call it.
take some self-care, and it's probably the best thing to do in a scenario like that. But of course, thoughts go out to anyone at the moment who is maybe struggling, not in the right headspace. Of course, the RCI family, I'm sure we speak for you, or speak for everyone in the staff roster board. We are always here for you, come rain or shine. If we're online, I'm sure everybody will, open their DMs to anyone. So, of course, keep focused, keep on yourself, and hopefully we'll see you in another event here at RCI. And speaking of which, of course, the calendar is looking very chock-a-block this week. Tuesday, we're back with Automobilista 2. It's, of course, the one-off events. And this time, it's the turn of What If WEC attended the Red Bull Ring. So Tim Ireland has cooked up LMDHs and LMP2s. It's going to be very Daytona-esque, isn't it? With the very short lap, of course, the high speeds of those cars. LMDH and LMP2, of course, take to the Austrian circuit. 40 minutes of racing on the clock on Tuesday with one mandatory pit stop. Wednesday, of course, we'll see our midweek Masters Series return. We, of course, had a week off last week for the GT2 update and the 1.9.6 patch that was dropped, of course, alongside that one. They head to Nürburgring this week with Marco Badowski leading Tom Shipston and Azurgo in Pro. Meanwhile, it's Gabriel Lafoco leading Keith Whittle and Jordan Bubbins in AM. Of course, that is a season dedicated to the pros, and of course the AMs that are essentially rookies to the ACC world. Of course, all the tracks are in the base game content, so no need to own any DLC. Just get signed up and get involved in that one. Thursday, of course, we were there last week. It's iRacing. Of course, last week was Daytona. This week is Road America for round 2. Lucas Kreistek winning GTP. Meanwhile, Heiler took LMP2 honours, and then Pavel Dolzau in GT3. So very competitive looking there as well. Friday, it's a brand new championship for Fridays. It's not GT3 like it usually is. It's, of course, the newly released. It's a newly released, Jesse Lee, GT2 pack. It's been on everybody's lips, and we are hosting a championship with it. We're heading to Suzuka for round 1 with no pre-qualifying on this one, so you can just sign up and get involved. And your destiny, this is an official quote from the sign-up page, your destiny is in your own hands in terms of split sign-up. They will keep the right to reserve to move drivers if and where necessary. So be honest with your sign-ups, and in theory, you shouldn't be moved later on down the line.
There's something special about that Friday champ, John. Would you like to know what it is?
Please enlighten me, Jesse Lee.
Well, of course, staff here at RCI is always moving and changing, of course, and one of the new additions for 2024 is a couple of new event managers. Kevin Boss, who will be known as a driver commentator, occasional broadcaster as well, is also taking up the mantle of an event manager, and so is our very own broadcaster extraordinaire, Ash Bibby. Now, they're teaming up to bring you Friday championships for right now. Could be doing other championships in the future, but for right now, certainly the Friday champ. They have the honors of bringing you the GT2 champ, and I'm going to judge them pretty hard, John. I don't know about you as a commentator, but I'm going to judge them pretty hard by how well it goes down.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to judge, isn't it, with sign-up numbers, etc. Between the two. Looking at the sign-up numbers, it's looking quite healthy at the moment. 21 drivers already got their name down. There's a mix of Split 1 and Split 2 drivers in there. It's got quite a good calendar as well, I would say so. Round 1 heading to Suzuka. Round 2, of course, we're bringing out the new track, Red Bull Ring. Round 3 at Misano, and round 4 back here at the Temple of Speed. So you've driven the Ferrari tonight, you might be in a slight kind of pre-training, shall we say, for the GT2 Championship. When we get here, you're going to fully understand how long these braking zones can get when you do mix a little bit faster top speed into there as well. Of course, Saturday Night Owl Season 17 sign-ups have also opened last week. Those of you in the Discord would have had a ping on that one. No pre-qualifying needed for this one either, but then once again we do reserve the right to move drivers where we feel is necessary. It's a 25-second fixed pit stop time, 60-minute races, with the final being 90 minutes in length. So get your names down for that one. Again, the night hour is elected to those of you on a slightly odder time zone, maybe not always kind of in the prime time for racing, so we do throw it back a few hours for you guys in those time zones. Meanwhile, on your screens, these guys have pitted, Jesse Lee, and it's thrown them back together once again. Nico Kumpu, of course, we're riding on board with, looking back currently at Klaus Naring, hunting him down in the slipstream down into turn 1. Both drivers standing on the brakes, just about getting the cars drawn up in time, and just looking towards the pit stop time. It's a fairly equal pit stop for both of them, of course, from pit in to pit out. It was 1 minute 8.4 for Nico Kumpu and only a 1 minute 8.6 for Klaus Naring. But something must have happened, Jesse, because Nico Kumpu was about 2 seconds clear when they came down pit road, and now, of course, Klaus Naring is breathing down the neck of the Rebound Racing 256.
Yeah, whatever happened to Klaus, they were able to recover. They were gaining back on him before the pit stop cycle, but who knows, maybe the in-lap or the out-lap was quicker. Vossi Tigris, by the way, leads the race. They're the only car that hasn't completed their mandatory stop. Menez Rodriguez, who ran inside the top 5 early in this race, has completed their stop, and they've made an additional trip down pit lane, a drive-through for speeding in the pit lane or track limits. Either way, that has dropped them all the way down to 19th place. That is a far cry from where they were running and qualified early in this race. It's going to be frustrating for Menez Rodriguez, but for these cars up in front, as Vossi Tigris does bring the number 15 down to pit lane, the TIG gang number 15. And that will complete the cycle of stops. These two drivers will cycle back to the front. Nico Kumpu continues to lead Klaus Naring, but it's the way it was about 15 minutes ago, where Klaus was right behind Nico for the lead. This has huge implications, folks. If Kumpu, who has just reset the quickest lap of the race of 48.492, approaching, we are certainly approaching what times they were running in qualifying at this stage as well. That is absolutely incredible pace, and to be kept in check by Klaus Naring just shows you these two drivers are destined to settle it amongst themselves, and to the exception of, well, all other exceptions. But this is huge, because if Kumpu wins this race, he gets a slightly more comfortable lead. It'll be about a 15, 16. It'll be more than that, actually. It'll be about it'll almost be a 17-point lead, because Nico Kumpu got pole position, which is also bonus points. It'll be around a 17-point lead if they finish like this. And now with Kumpu having the quickest lap, it might be about 20 points or so. So if Klaus Naring is able to maybe take away fast lap or even just beat Kumpu in the race, that will undo a lot of that good. This could be a huge night for Nico Kumpu's championship hopes, and it could go a long way in dashing Klaus Naring's if it stands like this right now.
Yeah, Kumpu's going to have to fend off Naring, isn't he, for the remaining 22 minutes. There's a big slide from Kumpu coming out of the Ascari chicane. That's going to hamper him down into the parabolic, and you see Naring pulling on him all the time. He's going to have to go defensive. He's going to have to make Naring go the long way around. Of course, that's not where you want to be in parabolica. The road isn't very cambered out there, and you already see Naring with a little slide through the middle of the turn, and that's going to hamper him coming off down towards the first chicane, which is going to be a good passing place if you can set the car up right. Just looking at the quick calculations, Jesse, it's going to be a 23-point lead that Kumpu walks away with if he can fend off the charging Dane in the number 23, and a little bit of traffic ahead. I think that's Keith Whittle in the Ferrari just ahead there, the number 157. So, of course, hopefully Keith is usually very respectful in his traffic management. I can't imagine he's going to put up too much of a fight, but we do know the slightest of mistakes, Jesse, can cause the biggest of impacts. And once they do dispatch of the 157, they've got nothing but clear air for a few laps to really open up these cars, and Naring looks very confident, doesn't he, into the corners. Looks like Naring ever so slightly better on the brakes going in, but it looks like Kumpu's got the better drive coming off. So we're going to have this game of cat and mouse now for the next 21 and a half minutes.
Yeah, it's going to be who blinks is going to likely lose this race between the two of them, and that's just a frustrating part of doing racing is somebody has to lose. You just hope it's not you. Let's see. Oh, he has to hit the brakes there, does Nico Kumpu. He tried to swing around the lap car, but almost judged it wrong. We saw cars off in the Curva Grande on lap 1 that were in a similar situation where they just couldn't turn the car. Oh, and it's a huge jump there, exiting the Ascari chicane. Nico Kumpu has absolutely clouded the curbing, and that sent them completely wide. Klaus Neiring is through. Klaus Neiring into the lead of the race. It's a huge mistake for Nico Kumpu.
Yeah, big mistake indeed,
Oh,
Jesse.
what a save!
You could see how much the Whittle incident kind of off-put him going into the Ascari chicane. He wasn't on the right line for the first part. The second part, he was too far over the curb, almost trying to overcorrect the bad entry from the first half. And then the third part just launched himself over the anti-cut. And we see GT3 cars suffering quite hard with that. And the Ferraris, of course, suffering the same fate as well. With this position switch, though, Jesse, both drivers will walk away with 65 points to their name, leaving the gap still exactly 9 points going into the next round. And Joe Dorber now looking to capitalise on Andy Boardman.
Oh, Nicholas Nordquist. Nicholas Nordquist has had an incident in the Ascari chicane, and they have elected to retire that car. Nicholas Nordquist was inside the top 10 when this happened. Oh, this is a different incident.
This is with Tigris into the first chicane. A little bit of contact being picked up on our tool, and I can only imagine that, like you say, Nordquist has maybe just kind of lost it on his own, Jesse, through the Ascari. Of course, you said yourself in practice and qualifying, a lot of drivers throwing localized yellows from just pushing the limits too hard through Ascari, and possibly what Nicholas Nordquist has done. And garage door down for the Sim Brothers entry, and they will take no further part in this round, meaning that even if you make it to the end of the race, Jesse, in P20, you're still going to walk away with 11 points. And with how close the championship is up and down the field, that's still a fair chunk of points to get over your rivals.
I was just going to say, Keith Whittle for Whittle's Wizards, the 157, they took 3 pit stops. 1 pit stop to fix the car, 1 to serve a drive-through, and an additional stop to satisfy the pit requirements. They're going to get several points that other cars aren't going to get. Yes, they're 2 laps off the pace. That's not the point. The point is they've outlasted several cars who have pulled into the pit lane, and in fact, they are quite close to some of the other cars that have had a spot of bother and some drama here tonight. So if somebody else stacks it, Keith Whittle could gain some more spots, and that's just the way it goes. The victor goes to spoils, and also to the patient in some instances as well. Keith didn't have a great start to the race. They've been able to sort of correct that a little bit. Now they're just out there turning laps and sort of reaping some of the rewards as well as some of these other cars fall out. Klaus Neiring has just done a huge 5-head move. Klaus Neiring has just taken the quickest lap of the race, a 1:48.420, and that is the quickest lap, and that changes everything in the championship. That takes it from a 9-point lead down to, what do you reckon, about a 4-point or a 5-point championship lead for Nico Kumpu if he can hold on to this.
I mean, if Nico can stay where he is, of course, 58 plus the 4 will take him 62 points away. Of course, Klaus Neiring with the 65 plus the 3 for the fastest lap will take 68 points away. Of course, with a difference of 9 points between them, it's going to certainly narrow that gap down somewhat, isn't it, Jesse? It's going to be very, very close indeed heading into the next round. So championship still very much alive for Neiring and Kumpu, although can Kumpu have an answer for the fastest lap? Of course, still over 17 minutes to go, just 2 minutes on the pit window, which doesn't of course matter. Everybody has completed their mandatory pit stop. So if Kumpu can take away the fastest lap once again, then it's going to be one of those, isn't it? It's going to be a back and forth kind of title race with 2 rounds to go. I didn't think this championship would be particularly close. I thought we would have one driver kind of romping it, but yeah, Klaus Nyring definitely kept Nico Kumpu honest, and the 157 of Keith Whittle showing a localized yellow just at the start-finish straight. Not sure what's happened there coming out of Parabolica. It's a bit of a weird place to lose the car, but something has happened indeed, and looks like coming to a stop on the circuit map once again. Les Stevenson, meanwhile, kind of in no man's land at the moment, but he's got a train bearing down on him, hasn't he? He's got Goat, Kerrigan, and Fukusho, with Redford even just behind as well. Still 16 minutes to go. Can the 46 hold off? And I think Keith Whittle actually down the pit lane. He did drive past the pit entry, so has teleported into the lane. I'm not sure what's happened, but potentially another retirement coming in, which of course will take the drivers down to 19, which means you'll still walk away with 12 points to your name, even if you do continue till the end.
Hey, you know where Les is right now? Obviously, he's at Monza, but do you know where he is? John, you should know.
He's near me.
Yeah, he's in the John Dalton zone, that's for
He
sure. He is very clearly in the John Dalton zone. Talk about a car that was in the wars very early on in this race. That was Les Stevenson for dropping the hammer, but now not quite so much. Azure is 1.8 behind, but this is still firmly in the John Dalton zone. If you're unfamiliar with what we're referring, our good pal here, John Dalton, has the uncanny ability. It doesn't matter if he's running first, second, third, fifth, 25th, it does not matter. John can find the open gap on the racetrack and sit there for 45 minutes. It is uncanny, his ability to not have to race anybody no matter what position he's in. We call it the John Dalton zone. Too far away to pass somebody in front. People are too far behind him to threaten him and make him defend. It is a John Dalton zone. It's becoming the Les Stevenson zone right now, but it was an eventful start to the race for Les. He settled in here in the top 10. He is getting caught by Goat, though. That time through that timing stripe, Goat gained the better part of 0.4 of a second, so maybe not in the zone for long.
Yeah, absolutely so. I mean, maybe Les Stevenson buying a timeshare in the John Dalton zone very, very soon indeed. But like you say, Goat catching very fast behind in the 765, so give it another lap or so, and I'm sure this man will be in the mix with the number 46. And of course, if they start squabbling too hard, that's going to bring... no, absolutely not. Unintentional. Poet, and I didn't know it on that one. But yeah, Goat is going to, of course, bring with him Kerrigan, if they're not too careful, of course, losing a lot of time battling between them. Just keeping an eye on the lap times at the front of the field as well, and waiting for Nico Kumpu to take away the fastest lap from Klaus Nyring, but just not having it at the moment. It's a 1:48.420 to beat, and last time by it was a 1:48.8 for Nico Kumpu, so just not near enough yet. Although with the fuel load burning off, Jesse, that could be what he needs to take it away, but time will tell on that one. And Goat has certainly closed up now, hasn't he, in the first sector. You can see Les Stevenson on the same TV cam at the trackside as Azure Goat. Of course, with the wiggle there out of the Lesmo, that's going to promote Azure Goat a lot more speed coming down the back straight, essentially under the banking. Through the tunnel they go into the Ascari chicane. Les has to keep it very clean now because the smallest of mistakes. We know what can happen, but equally Azure Goat has outbraked himself a few times in this race. So, there's a car off ahead. That's Hubert Hauser off in the gravel. He stays way off the racing line, which is very smart from Hauser. Doesn't impede the fight at all, and I'm sure Les Stevenson had a bit of a panic moment there coming through Ascari and kind of reading the road ahead. You know, you see the yellow flag flash up on the Lumi rank in the car, and all of a sudden your eyes are darting everywhere but where you need to be looking to try and spot where that car was. And luckily Hauser just way off the racing line at the moment. But Goat is coming. The gap is down to just about half a second, Jesse Lee. I think Les has really got a fight on his hands towards the end of the race now.
I think Les Stevenson's going to have to go as defensive as possible, but you talk about the car being off Hubert Hauser there. Hubert didn't do anything wrong there, but that's always a scary situation. We saw that earlier on, but as bad as that was for Les Stevenson, at least Les knew where the car was. Goat was approaching it in a blind spot because Les was there masking the car. That was probably infinitely more of a jump scare for Racing Team Sobolew's Azir Goat, but somehow they were able to, since they were in space, not have an issue. Of course, Hubert Hauser played their part, staying to the right of the circuit. And if it can happen to Hauser, it can happen to anyone here in this race. Keith Whittle, by the way, did pull over on the start-finish straight, and they did return to the pit lane. They have not officially retired that car, but for all intents and purposes, that car is out of the race. They will not receive championship points, leaving 19 cars. Here it is from the visor cam of Azir Goat, looking down to the inside of Ascari. Les Stevenson gives them just enough room, calls their bluff. Goat has to back off due to the tight nature of the corner, and Les Stevenson is able to use the second part of the apex to maintain 10th place. It's not for small points. Top 10, those are good points at the end of the day. Points that both Stevenson and Goat would very much like to have. Now, the interesting thing was, I think Callum Kerrigan had an incident. I'm pretty sure Kerrigan was behind Goat, and now Fasciuto is the car behind Goat. Unconfirmed. My eyes could be playing tricks on me, but I could have sworn Kerrigan was in 12th.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, Kerrigan was ahead of Fukushio at one point, but of course that has switched round on that one. So 4.5 seconds clear behind is Goat to Fukushio, and very, very close through the second half of the first chicane there. Goat is looking very racy. He is throwing all of that car into the rearview mirror of Les Stevenson. Just over 10 minutes to go, Jesse. Of course, about 2 minutes a lap, so maybe about another 5 laps or so, depending, of course, where the race leaders cross the line in terms of the checkered flag. Nico Kumpu, meanwhile, no answer out front to Klaus Nyring. He's 3 seconds to the good now. Christian Lindgren even further back than he was, 6.5 seconds before the pit stop. I think the gap was up to about 8 seconds after the pit stop, so losing time down the lane as well, and the gap is now near 11 seconds to Christian Lindgren, so he's very much clear. Andy Boardman again sat in no man's land with Joe Dorber. John Aracer equally the same with Tom Shipston, just 3.7 seconds behind Aracer, so kind of the closest fight other than the guys on the screen at the moment. Of course, Les Stevenson now pulling out a gap a little bit, but he's gone too wide in the first half of Ascari. He's going to have to bring it back. A wiggle there from Les Stevenson in the middle, and Azir Goat is going to get the much cleaner run off the corner down towards the Parabolica, but it looks like Les's car just about has enough legs, Jesse. Maybe a little bit lower wing in the Les Stevenson car, but Azir Goat there not managing to capitalize on Les Stevenson's mistake, but Les certainly feeling the pressure right now, I'd say.
Goat had to turn to the left, John. That's what happened. I mentioned earlier, you can't just change direction in this car like a GT3 or a GT4 car. It's not that simple. It has to be a thought-out process. That's why you see a lot of cars earlier on in the race, Kumpu and Nyring, when they were racing each other, one car would take the car normally, the other one would offset on purpose. That's simply to make sure that if they bobble off the corner, the lead car, you are not lined up behind them, because you cannot move the car due to the limited aero of the car. You can't move it out of the way and maintain your momentum, and that's exactly what happened to Azir that time through. Les was dead to rights exiting the Ascari chicane. Les knew that. Azir knew that. Les put his car on the outside, which meant that Azir had to turn to the left, lest they would rear end Les, easy for me to say, and that's what it was. Just killed the momentum. The fact that Azir had to turn that car hard to the left, and Les now knows that. All I have to do is be where they want to be, and maybe I can just about get away with it. But Les, I don't know if Stevenson knew that initially, or that was just a lucky sort of the way it went, going too wide. But both of these cars trying very hard. Goat, for my money, the quicker of the two, but Stevenson very defensive, making a few mistakes. It hasn't bit him yet. He's always been able to put his car where he needs to here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, Les is reading the situation perfectly at the moment. So he's just doing all he needs to do to fend off Goat, and of course the slipstream effect not really having much effect for the 765. Meanwhile, Mike Redford looks like he's still on a bit of a chargeback. Jesse, of course, a second now to the good on the rear of Callum Kerrigan, the number 28. Not sure if he's going to have enough legs in him to catch, of course, Fukushio, who is up the road some 5 seconds or so with 6.5 minutes just over to go. I think that's going to be a big ask for Redford, but Kerrigan's certainly within earshot, of course, with the 1 point, what was it, a second to the good as they cross the line. It's a very achievable gap. Again, small mistakes, Jesse, like we say, can cause the biggest time losses. So all Kerrigan has to do is keep it very smooth indeed. Meanwhile, Martin Foster definitely in no man's land, a lap ahead essentially of Richard Withall, and some 22 seconds to the good off the back of Kalmari. He's going to be relatively settled in the RPMS SimSport number 44 as he rounds through the first chicane. Of course, it's not been Martin Foster's race really on this one, but again, we reset, and of course next week we do move to another track, of course that being Donington Park. Again, it's a very old school circuit, Jesse. Lots of grass, lots of gravel, and lots of track limits through the S's towards the end of the lap. That's going to catch out a lot of drivers, I am sure, next week.
Donington Park, the exact opposite of Monza in a lot of ways. Monza is wide. You have the ability to get side by side and overtake in some of the braking zones. There's going to be a lot of mistakes at the One Groove racetrack known as Donington Park. It's a fan favorite track, and these cars, though, can be an exercise in frustration if you get it wrong, because we went over it all day long. This racetrack in particular here at Monza has exemplified just how bad, when you need to change direction quickly, how bad it can go for you. And well, Donington Park is going to be the epitome of that. It is a one groove track. You have to be in that to be quick. You get out of it, you start hemorrhaging seconds, and you will do. You'll be able to see that next Monday night with John, myself, and Ash on the call. It's going to be a track where you can't get away with it here. You have paved runoffs here. You've got sand traps, gravel traps to save you here. Not quite the case. You can just spear off into the nothing at Donington Park. You can ruin your race in an instant. And it's going to be definitely an effort in who makes the fewest mistakes next week, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's a very, it's a basic circuit on the face of it, but of course Donington Park, lots of, tight, twisty and technical parts, certainly in the, in the GT3 cars, let alone when you throw everybody in a Challenger car, of course, the Craner curves.
Can you imagine going too wide?
Yeah, too wide. Too wide Donington Park, maybe even Craner curves too wide. It's going to be a slight lift, I would say, at best. But of course, GT3 cars flat out, so you can only imagine with the less aero, it's going to be a slight lift from these boys as they go down towards, of course, the old hairpin. Again, a tricky corner in a high downforce car. Take all the downforce out, and again, it's going to get even harder towards the top of the hill. You've got McLean's again. Coppice, a lot of drivers electing to run low TC, of course, with the lock cranked on for Coppice. As soon as you plant the throttle, again, the rear is going to step out. It's going to be a bit of a drift fest, I would say, at turn 8 next week. So, yeah, it's going to be a super interesting circuit. And then, of course, Mount Panorama, which is going to be even more hell, I would say, as we get towards the end of the season. But Klaus Nyring looking very comfortable at the front of the field right now. 4 seconds to the good on Nico Kumpu in the number 256. Of course, fastest lap to his name means he will close the points gap ever so slightly as we head to round 5 next week. So yeah, it's super competitive between the Dane and the Finn here, and I'm sure we're going to see a lot more championship fights kind of emerging down the order that we're not kind of intently following or so aware of. But it looks like Klaus Nyring is still pushing very hard as he comes out of Ascari, dips the right side tyres in the gravel, gets a little bit of airtime, Jesse, and we know how tricky these cars can be when they get bouncing. So that could have been very touch and go for the race leader. Of course, 2 minutes 30 on the clock. It's going to be another 2 laps through before the checkered flag will come out. So he's got to keep it clean now, Klaus, for 2 laps. You don't want to dial it back too much, Jesse, because Nico Kumpu is still there. He's still racing and pushing hard. But at the same time, you don't want to push too hard, because if you make that mistake, you could undo all your hard work this evening in an instant.
Yeah, there's something to be said though about not letting up. You've spent your whole race in attack mode, and you're kind of comfortable with your muscle memory where it is. Especially if you're up near the front of this field, you kind of got a handle on it. And it's so easy with a 3-second gap here in the final couple of minutes, just to let off just a little bit, to relax a little bit. But that a lot of drivers, they perform worse when they do that. I know I can't do that. I can't just elect to go to 85% on the dial. I'm at 95, 99, never 100% because then I'll just crash. But you get my point. You dial it down to 85 and you're just sort of driving lackadaisical. You lose your focus a little bit. You lose your edge, and all of a sudden now you're banging curbs that you weren't hitting before because you're less focused in. And something to be said about Klaus continuing. And Nico Kumpu, don't take anything away from Kumpu. They've not backed off at all. In fact, they've gained 2/10 in that last sector alone. They're trying to keep Klaus honest. They are keeping Klaus honest here in the final minute or so. In fact, gained another 2 or 3 tenths did Nico Kumpu. Is Klaus Nyring having to save a little bit of fuel here? Or is Klaus dialing it back just a little bit? Or did Nico Kumpu find something in the final minute or so?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, isn't it? I mean, made up 4 tenths, I think it was nearly in that one sector alone. So maybe Nyring struggling with tyres, maybe, like you say, Jesse, just not enough fuel in the car. Of course, he's going to have to go another lap, still 35 seconds or something when he crosses the line on the clock at the top of your screen. A 149.990 last time by for Klaus Nyring. Nico Kumpu last time by with a 149.6. So a slight gain there, but not a massive chunk again. Nico Kumpu retaining, should we say, 2 tenths back on Nyring again, so down to 2.6 seconds the gap. But just looking at the championship standings and of course, who is in the race at the moment, who's in the top half of the race, Andy Boardman, I think, might be the dark horse going into the final few rounds. Of course, he's down in P10 of the championship at the moment, but bear in mind the names ahead of him on the board. Joe Dorber, currently just behind him on circuit. Angela Scotti, of course, retired from tonight's race. John Aracer down in P6, 2 positions behind. Tom Shipston down in P7. And, of course, Nicholas Nordquist in 5th, who, again, has retired from this evening. So Andy Boardman could set a very healthy set of points to take away tonight and possibly propel himself even further inside the top 10. Callum Kerrigan, meanwhile, has kept Redford honest behind. I think Redford's made a mistake because that gap was about a second. It's now 2.5 seconds a few laps later. So some mistakes there maybe coming out from Redford. And it looks like Kerrigan is still keeping Fukusho honest as well. The gap, I believe, was about 1.3 seconds when we last checked in. It's now down to a second. So slight gains from Kerrigan, but still not enough to catch the Italian in the number 20. Of course, the white flag is currently out at the moment, and it's out, of course, for this man. We will change to the checkered flag, but it is Klaus Nyring that prevails at the Temple of Speed this evening in the number 23. Got a great start, managed to beat Nico Kumpu through the laps, through the hour, and Nico Kumpu will come through in second. So the championship still wide open as we head to round 5 and 6 in the next 2 weeks. Christian Lindgren kind of lingering in no man's land all race from the get-go, really. Andy Boardman was his nearest competitor, just behind in P4. Joe Dorber for Rebound Racing, a much better result than last week. Of course, P5 tonight, followed by John Aracer in the 699 in P6. Tom Shipston will take home P7 from Christian Clipper, who is still fighting Tigris. There's contact in the Parabolica. Clipper fires off to driver's left. Tigris does the honourable thing and waits for Clipper to come back on. That's a very admirable move there from the number 15. Looks like Clipper maybe just stood on the brakes a little bit too hard, trying to get the nose pitched in, and Tigris just wasn't expecting it, and in to the back he goes. Les Stevenson P10, Azure Goat P11. Something happened there, Jesse. 2.7 seconds to the good. Goat dropped back on that one. Fukusho P12, Kerrigan P13, Redford in P14, internet connection held stable. Denat Kalmari in P15. Menez Rodriguez has finished already down in P18 along with Hubert Hauser. Looks like Foster and the 957 of Richard Whittle are the last two cars still circulating for a valid checkered flag. Of course, Keith Whittle did pull the car into the pits some laps ago, so he will take, of course, no further part there, possibly even coaching on Richard Whittle in the house as well in the 957 as he comes across the line to close out tonight's race. And what a fantastic race we had, Jesse. We had low sign-up numbers on the grid, some 23 drivers, I believe it was, from the get-go. But fantastic racing nonetheless. Even for 23 drivers, it was absolutely chaotic from start to finish.
Can't say enough about Klaus Nyring and the job he did. Wasn't able to get it done prior to the pit stop and even after the pit stop, admittedly, but he kept it close, did Klaus. Nico Kumpu did just enough to keep Klaus Nyring behind him for the early part of the race. The pit stop caught Nyring all the way back up to Kumpu and just forced that one mistake is all it took. Nico Kumpu going wide, having to save the race car, and Klaus Nyring was able to sneak on through. It came down again. Kumpu caught him a couple of times, was just unable to get anything going. Klaus was unflappable there at the end of the race. A well-deserved win by Klaus Nyring, but plaudits to Nico Kumpu and Lindgren as well. They've been the top of the series, and they continue to put on an excellent show. Miguel Martins mentioned that they were asleep. They wanted to watch this race. Well, the VOD updates immediately when the stream goes offline. You really should watch it. It was a good one. Here are the final finishers of the race. Keep in mind, looks like Keith Whittle, Nicholas Nordquist, Carlos Coladian, and Scotty did not finish the race. Those cars will not get points for the finish today. So top 19 getting championship points. Our top two, John, as close as they've ever been. 2 races to go, and we're going back to the UK. We're going to Donny next week, and that is going to be a race of precision.
Yeah, it's going to be very tricky, isn't it? Donington, very old school circuit, lots of grass and gravel, not a lot of extra curbing and tarmac to boot. So it's really going to test these guys on what they can do, keeping it, of course, between the white lines, should we say? On that one, of course, Klaus Nyring will walk away today with 68 points, and of course Nico Kumpu just behind him will take away 62 points. Of course, with the gap margining between the two, it was 9 points coming in. Take away some 6 points, of course, the difference from today. They're going to be sat on about 3 points difference between them going into the penultimate round. So it's going to be a very tricky one to fend off. I can only imagine these guys are going to be practicing all week to really nail Donington down. So yeah, it's going to be a super tricky one next week. Of course, if you are just joining us, thank you very much for the late join. Of course, like Jesse says, the full VOD will be up straight after the race, so you can all watch that back. And I know a lot of the drivers do this as well. So hello to you all if you've made it this far. What a fantastic show you put on for myself, Jesse, and Ash this evening. And none of it would be possible, of course, without you guys at home, and of course, without the drivers taking part as well. And if you do want to get involved, you can head on over to the website. That's racerci.com. You can find a link down below in the description alongside all of our social media and also all of our partners as well. Over on the website, at the moment, we do have sign-ups open for Tuesday. That's tomorrow. We'll see Auto Mobilista 2 one-offs return, and this time it's the turn of the LMDH and LMP2 as we head to the Red Bull Ring there. Wednesday, we'll see Midweek Masters return. We're heading to the Nürburgring this week. Of course, still space on that one, I believe, if you do want to get involved in a mid-season. Thursday, back iRacing with the IMSA Season 1 series, heading to Road America. And Friday, we'll begin our brand new GT2 Championship. Short 4-round championship taking us through Fridays in February, heading to Suzuka for round 1. No pre-qualifying on this one. Your destiny is in your own hands in terms of split signups, though we do reserve the right to move you at any given time, as we have an evil laugh from Ash Bibby in my ears on that one of the event organisers. Saturday night out, season 17 signups have also opened last week. No pre-qualifying for this one either, but once again, we are reserving the right to move anyone at any given time. 60-minute races with fixed 25-second pit stops, with the final race being 90 minutes in length. So get your names down for that one if you are in a slightly obscure time zone, or you just want to get involved in some good old late night racing while the family is all asleep and you're creeping away in the sim rig, trying to get your hours in that you can for the week. Of course, a big thank you to you guys at home once again, and an even bigger thank you, of course, to our partners that make all this possible. Of course, AK Esports, a leading Italian company in esports management, working with brands such as Porsche, SRO Group, Delara, and many other brands, including us here at RCI with our server solutions. So if you do believe they can help you at all, head on over to their website. Driver61.com, of course, with 25% off your driver coaching by using our discount code. You can find a link down below in the description to their website. Fanatec, again, needs no introduction. I say this every time, but we do have an RCI affiliate link. So if you do want to purchase any hardware in the 2024 season, be sure to use our link, and that'll sprinkle a few pennies into the RCI pot. And of course, two partners we had join us last year, digitalmotorsports.com, again, offering a number of products and services from early drive programs, esports championships, driver training, simulator components, and even complete turnkey SimRig solutions. Founded in 2018 by two enthusiastic motorsports fans, they had a vision to create Ireland's leading digital motorsport environment and resource. Be sure to visit them if you are on the market for any of their services. And lastly, but no means least, of course, Go Setups, formed to be one of the premium esports setup stores for ACC, with their primary aim to create setups for every skill level, whether you're esports ready or just looking for a safer alternative for your favorite car. Be sure to check them out, and they have dropped, I believe, a few GT2 setups. They've got 8 new tracks for the R8, 7 new tracks for the KTM this week, more GT3 Red Bull releases, as well as 4 new cars to their lineup as well, including the Bentley, the NSX Evo, the old 991 GT3R, and the 488 GT3 Evo as well. So if you are a main person that still uses any of the older machinery, or the Bentley did have a fairly big tweak in the latest patch, along with the Lexus and the Nissan, be sure to check them out for any of your setup needs. But of course, it does conclude tonight, where we do say our goodbyes. It has been a fantastic race at Monza, even though it has been slightly limited in the numbers. Of course, next week we find ourselves at Donington Park, a very old school, technical, tricky circuit, where I'm sure we're going to see lots of action aplenty. And being a daytime race, it might attract a few more of the drivers back before we head, of course, to the finale the following week down under at Mount Panorama. That's going to be one you don't want to miss. Championship still wide open, of course, tonight's race results pending any further stewards' inquiries. And, of course, we'll update you next week with where the championship stands. But from myself, John Dalton, from Jesse Lee alongside me in the booth, and from Ash Bibby behind the cameras, we hope you enjoyed tonight. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the week, and take care of yourselves, where we'll see you once again on RCI TV.